Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 10th anniversary commemoration of the passage of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. We're so glad you could join us in honoring those who worked tirelessly for passage of the law, as well as those now on the front lines of hate crimes enforcement and prevention. I'm Robert Musi. I'm a Deputy Assistant Attorney General here in the Civil Rights Division, and I will be emceeing this event. First, please rise for the presentation of the colors by the Metropolitan Police Department Ceremonial Honor Guard and the singing of our national anthem by Dorothy Williams from the Civil Rights Division. Please rise.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the Rockies red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated. And a real warm thank you to Ms. Williams and a thank you to the Metropolitan Police Department Ceremonial Honor Guard. Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, Eric Dreiband, will provide opening remarks. Before arriving at the Justice Department, Mr. Dreiband was a partner at a major international law firm. He previously served as the General Counsel of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, where he directed the federal government's litigation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and several other federal employment anti-discrimination laws. Prior to his EEOC service, Mr. Dreiband also served as Deputy Administrator of the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, where he directed the federal government's enforcement of the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and other laws. Since arriving at the Civil Rights Division, Mr. Dreiband has made preventing and prosecuting hate crimes one of his top priorities. Please help me welcome Assistant Attorney General Eric Dreiband.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to talk about a few examples of what we've seen the last few years. First, a peaceful Bible study at a historically black church in Charleston, South Carolina, worshipers at Shabbat morning services in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, an Islamic community in Victoria, Texas, all interrupted by violence. And those are only a few of the countless modern headlines that describe horrific shootings and arsons, death, and destruction. It is easy to think of hate crimes as a new problem, but sadly, hate is older than America itself. Our values as a nation are rooted in our founding history and enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, which boldly proclaims as a self-evident truth that all of us are created equal. Yet for many of us, and many of those in our history, those values did not really exist. As we approach Thanksgiving, we are reminded that our nation was settled by Puritans and Pilgrims who left England because the English monarch denied them religious and other forms of freedom, harassed them, and sometimes tortured them for their religious beliefs. And yet the Pilgrims and the Puritans who came to these shores did not always respect religious freedom of others. For example, in Boston in 1660, a woman named Mary Dyer was an English Puritan who became a Quaker. And when she became a Quaker, she violated a law that banned Quakers from the Massachusetts colony. She suffered the ultimate penalty when she and others were executed in Boston Common for the crime of being a Quaker in Massachusetts. In another of our founding settlements, Jamestown was responsible for the importation of slaves from Africa. That violent legacy and decision split our country, as President Abraham Lincoln famously said, 77 years after its founding, and cascades down through the centuries and touching us even today. After the Civil War, the Congress enacted and the states ratified the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and abolished slavery, but the 13th Amendment did not end race-related violence. Indeed, in May of 1865, former slave and civil rights activist Frederick Douglass warned that even after ratification of the 13th Amendment, quote, "Any wretch may enter the house of a black man and commit any violence he pleases. If he happens to do it only in the presence of black persons, he goes unwhipped of justice." Mr. Douglass's warning proved prophetic. Later in 1865, in the very month that slavery was abolished, Confederate veterans in Pulaski, Tennessee, formed a club that soon evolved into the most violent terrorist organization the country had ever seen. The Ku Klux Klan murdered thousands and intimidated tens of thousands of Americans, both in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War and in its incarnation in the 20th century. The Klan targeted blacks, Jews, Catholics, and anyone who supported them. Lynchings by the Klan and by similar organizations occurred throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often unabated by state police or prosecutors. The federal government then had no tools to address the problem of bias-motivated violence. Attempts by the federal government to prosecute such violent acts of bias were unsuccessful because existing statutes did not adequately cover non-government actors, and the courts read into such statutes a lack of federal authority to prosecute bias crimes under the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. During the 1960s, Americans witnessed several racially motivated murders, including the shooting death of civil rights activist Medgar Evers in Jackson, Mississippi, the murderous bombing by white supremacists of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, and corresponding deaths of Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, and Carol Robertson, all age 14, and Carol Denise McNair, age 11. The executions of civil rights workers James Chaney, Andrew Goodwin, and Michael Schwerner in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968. As a result of all of this violence and the dedicated work of many civil rights activists, public officials, and other Americans, the Congress enacted, and 1 week after the assassination of Dr. King, on April 11, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed America's first hate crimes statute. One statute made it a crime to use or threaten to use force to willfully interfere with any person because of race, color, or national origin, and because the person is participating in a federally protected activity, such as public education, employment, jury service, travel, or the enjoyment of public accommodations, or helping another person to do so. A second statute made it a crime to use or threaten to use force to interfere with housing rights because of the victim's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And in 1988, Congress added protections for familial status and disabilities. These laws were effective tools for the federal government, but they did not end violence in America or empower the federal government to seek justice for all its incarnations. These laws, for example, did not protect houses of worship. And in 1996, after black churches burned throughout the South, Congress enacted the Church Arson Prevention Act. That law authorizes punishment for defacement, damage, and destruction of religious real property at any house of worship, be it a church, a mosque, a synagogue, or other house of worship or sacred building. The Congress and the President amended the law last year to increase its effectiveness. Yet despite these laws, there remained a gap in federal law. The 1968 laws required proof of both an act of violence and also proof that the defendant intended to interfere with a specified list of protected rights, for example, the right to own or occupy a dwelling. This meant that a defendant might be acquitted if the defendant successfully argues that although he had assaulted his neighbor because of the color of his skin, the assault had nothing to do with the neighbor's house. In other words, that he would also have assaulted his neighbor if he saw him at work, at prayer, or on the street. Moreover, until 2009, only one federal hate crime law covered crimes against individuals with disabilities, and none allowed prosecution of defendants who targeted the LGBT community. Congress eventually decided that these individuals needed protection. In 1998, Matthew Shepard, a 21-year-old student at the University of Wyoming, was robbed, tortured, tied to a fence along a country road, and left to die by two men who offered him a ride home from a local bar. The investigation into Matthew Shepard's death found strong evidence that his attackers targeted him because he was gay. That same year, James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old African-American man who lived in Jasper, Texas, also accepted a ride home from three men. They drove him to the remote edge of town, where they beat him severely, tied him by the ankles to the back of a pickup truck, and dragged him to his death. In the case of James Byrd Jr., the three men responsible for his killings were well-known white supremacists. But while these men were responsible for the brutally killing Matthew and James were later convicted of murder, none of them was prosecuted for committing a hate crime. At the time Matthew and James were murdered, neither Wyoming nor Texas had a hate crime law, and existing federal statutes did not include violent acts based on the victim's sexual orientation and only covered racial violence against those engaged in a federally protected activity such as voting or attending school. 10 years ago this month, the Congress enacted and President Barack Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. This landmark legislation greatly expanded the federal government's ability to prosecute hate crimes. The law enables the Justice Department to prosecute crimes motivated by race, color, religion, and national origin without having to show that the defendant engaged in a federally protected activity. The Shepard-Byrd Act also empowers the department to prosecute crimes committed because of a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, gender, or disability as hate crimes. When Congress enacted the Shepard-Byrd Act, it found, and I quote, "For generations, the institutions of slavery and involuntary servitude were defined by the race, color, and ancestry of those held in bondage. Slavery and involuntary servitude were enforced both prior to and after the adoption of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States through widespread public and private violence directed at persons because of their race, color, or ancestry, or perceived race, color, or ancestry. Accordingly, eliminating racially motivated violence is an important means of eliminating, to the extent possible, the badges, incidents, and relics of slavery and involuntary servitude. Congress determined that the incidents of violence motivated by the actual race, color, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability of the victim pose, quote, a serious national problem and that violence disrupts the tranquility and safety of communities and is deeply divisive. Congress found that, quote, existing federal law is inadequate to address this problem, and that a prominent characteristic of violent crime motivated by bias is that it devastates not just the actual victim and the family and friends of the victim, but frequently savages the community sharing the traits that cause the victim to be selected. Hate crimes are message crimes. These crimes both injure the victims and have special emotional and psychological impact on individuals and communities who share the traits targeted by the crime. As Congress found, such crimes may intimidate other members of the victim's community, leaving them feeling terrorized, isolated, and vulnerable. Federal hate crime charges thus not only fill the gap when state prosecutions fail to address serious criminal intent, they also carry significant symbolic value. Such charges recognize the crime committed was an attack against both a specific victim and an attack against an entire community that shares the victim's protected trait. Federal hate crime charges also send a message to members of targeted groups that they are valued members of society and that their protection matters. Today we celebrate Congress's historic decision and honor those whose years of advocacy and activism made passage of the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act possible. In a speech last Friday, Attorney General William Barr reminded us of the danger of tyranny if our government becomes, quote, too controlling. He also explained that unless you have some effective restraint, you end up with another form of tyranny, where the individual is enslaved by his appetites and the possibility of any healthy community life crumbles. Hate crimes threaten the health of our community life, and a decade after the passage of the Shepard-Byrd Act, and more than 20 years after the brutal murders of the men for whom it was named, prosecuting hate crimes remains a top priority here at the Department of Justice. Since its passage 10 years ago, the Department has used the Shepard-Byrd Act to charge more than 100 defendants in approximately 50 hate crime cases and has secured convictions against more than 80 of those defendants, with some cases still pending. These prosecutions are a key part of the Department's overall hate crimes prosecution program, which in the last 10 years has charged more than 330 defendants in more than 210 hate crime cases. Since January 2017 alone, the Department of Justice has charged more than 70 defendants for committing crimes motivated by hate. For example, in 2017, the Department brought charges for the murder of Mercedes Williamson, who was targeted because of gender identity. The defendant pleaded guilty in federal court in Mississippi and received a sentence of 49 years. In another case, the department sent a federal criminal civil rights prosecutor to work with Iowa State prosecutors to try 2 men for the murder of Kadari Johnson, a high school student attacked because of gender identity. The case resulted in convictions and life sentences for both defendants in 2 separate trials. In August 2018, the defendant was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to federal hate and firearms charges for shooting 3 men at a bar in Olathe, Kansas. The defendant shot and killed an Indian engineer named Srinivas Kuchabatla and attempted to kill an Indian co-worker and a 3rd man who came to their aid. The crime was motivated by race, color, and national origin bias. This past year, the department moved swiftly to seek an indictment after a deadly attack at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A superseding indictment had charged the defendant, Robert Bowers, with 63 counts, including federal hate crime charges. That attack took the lives of 11 individuals who were then at worship and injured 7 others, including 4 police officers. This past spring, after a shooter killed 1 and wounded 3 others at the Shabbat of Poway Synagogue and set fire to the Dar ul Arqam Mosque, both in Southern California, the department charged John Earnest in a 113-count indictment that included numerous hate crime charges. This summer, James Alex Fields Jr. was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to numerous hate crimes, including the hate crime murder of Heather Heyer and the attempted murder of 28 others. Mr. Fields drove his car into a racially and ethnically diverse crowd of individuals who were then engaged in peaceful demonstration in Charlottesville in August of 2017. Now, the department's commitment to combating hate crimes extends beyond criminal prosecutions. So in 2017, the department created a hate crime subcommittee as part of its task force on violent crime reduction, and which has since been transformed into a freestanding department-wide hate crimes enforcement and prevention initiative. Led by the Civil Rights Division, the new initiative coordinates the department's efforts to eradicate hate crimes and facilitates outreach to law enforcement agencies and the public. For example, this summer, the department hosted a day-long summit on combating anti-Semitism that featured remarks from federal leaders across the government. Panel presentations focused on hate crimes prosecution, anti-Semitism on campus, and how to combat anti-Semitism while respecting the First Amendment, among other issues. In August 2018, the department's Hate Crime Initiative convened the first ever seminar on investigating and prosecuting hate crimes and domestic terrorism, and brought together 70 civil rights domestic terrorism prosecutors and agents to discuss how to collaborate better when investigating and prosecuting hate crimes that also constitute acts of domestic terrorism. A year ago this month, in October 2018, the department's Hate Crime Initiative convened a law enforcement roundtable on hate crimes. The day-and-a-half-long event, highlighted in a forthcoming report, brought law enforcement and other leaders from around the country together with department officials to explore successful practices and challenges in identifying and reporting and tracking hate crimes. At the event, the department announced the launch of a comprehensive new hate crimes website designed to provide a centralized portal for the department's hate crimes resources for law enforcement, media, researchers, victims, advocacy groups, and other related organizations. The website is available at www.justice.gov/hatecrimes, and it has attracted over 200,000 visitors since its launch. Also announced last year was the extension of significant technical assistance to help state, local, and tribal law enforcement with hate crimes prosecution and prevention through the Collaborative Reform Technical Assistance Center, a partnership with the International Association of Chiefs of Police and 9 leading law enforcement, leadership, and labor organizations. Throughout the roundtable, as discussed in a forthcoming report capturing input from the event, representatives from diverse law enforcement agencies and national policing organizations engaged in collaborative brainstorming and action planning with federal government leaders. At the roundtable, law enforcement told us that the single most important tool that the federal government could provide to improve investigation and reporting of hate crimes was hate crime trainings at all levels of law enforcement. Today, I'm proud to announce that the department is supporting development of a comprehensive hate crimes training curriculum for law enforcement. The department's COPS office is working with the Collaborative Reform Initiative to develop a training opportunity designed to support law enforcement response, investigation, and reporting of hate crimes, consistent with the administration's guidance. The course, when developed and made available, will be focused on increasing the capacity and competency to investigate and accurately report hate crimes and pursuing the best option for prosecution of perpetrators. Feedback from the Law Enforcement Roundtable on improving the identification and reporting of hate crimes has obviously been an important catalyst for change. Law Enforcement Roundtable participants told us that the positive relationships between law enforcement and the community encourage the reporting of hate crimes and that they need assistance in building and sustaining strong community-police relationships. In response, we developed an outreach and engagement program entitled United Against Hate, Cultivating Community Partnerships. The 2-phase program aims to address the underreporting of hate crimes by community members to law enforcement. In the second phase of the program, United States Attorney offices will have the opportunity to facilitate trainings across the country, convening a wide array of community groups such as advocacy organizations, educators, and local leaders, including religious leaders, to discuss the impact of hate crimes and employ strategies to build trust with federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement. The ultimate goal of the program is to further hate crimes prevention efforts and improve the accuracy of hate crime statistics as more people become willing to report hate crimes to law enforcement. This is important because of the number of hate crimes that constitute domestic terrorism. Individuals who adhere to racially motivated and other forms of violent extremism ideology have been responsible for the most lethal incidents among domestic terrorists in recent years. Violent extremists are increasingly using social media for the distribution of propaganda, recruitment, target selection, and incitement to violence. Strong law enforcement and community bonds are critical to identifying and stemming this kind of extremism. As stated, hate crimes are message crimes. Our recognition of the 10th anniversary of the Shepard-Byrd Act today also sends a message, namely, that the Department of Justice will not tolerate violence that targets individuals based on actual or perceived race, religion, national origin, gender, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or color. The passage of the Shepard-Byrd Act was the culmination of a struggle that lasted more than a decade. The cause endured only because the families of Matthew Shepard and James Byrd, along with other interested, patriotic, and dedicated persons and organizations, toiled for years, many of whom are with us today. The continued importance and impact of the Shepard-Byrd Act is possible only through the incredible efforts of these people and organizations and those in the law enforcement community, both those on the front lines and at the Department of Justice prosecution teams here in Washington, D.C., and United States Attorney's offices across the country. It is our privilege today to honor those who work day and night to ensure that the promise of the Shepard-Byrd Act, protecting all communities against the scourge of hate crime, is fulfilled. Let us move forward with a renewed commitment to the principle that every American and every person in America should enjoy equal protection of the laws and should be free to live and worship in safety. I thank you for your services to your community and to your country. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was wonderful remarks. I would now like to introduce Cynthia Dedel of the Matthew Shepard Foundation and Michelle Coles of the Civil Rights Division. Ms. Dedel is the Programs and Operations Director of the Matthew Shepard Foundation and oversees the foundation's hate crimes work, community outreach, and events. She retired as a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2017 after serving 22 years specializing in the fields of investigating and prosecuting police brutality, public corruption, hate crimes, and conducting community outreach. She was a fantastic partner of the Civil Rights Division and was really a critical person in the early days of the Shepard-Byrd Act and its implementation. Ms. Dedel will be reading a letter from Judy and Dennis Shepard, Matthew Shepard's parents. Afterward, Ms. Coles will be reading a letter from the Byrd family. Cynthia?
Before I begin, I just want to thank Mr. Dreiband and Mr. Musi for inviting Dennis and Judy Shepard to this event. They send their sincere regrets. They are traveling today and unable to attend. But I did want to say thank you for inviting us. Throughout the history of this country, discrimination against someone because of their race, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or because of another characteristic has been unfortunately quite prevalent. Along with that discrimination came violence to remove those considered other. Our son Matt was the result of that discrimination and violence when he was beaten brutally and left to die on the outskirts of Laramie, Wyoming in early October 1998. He died 5 days later, never regaining consciousness from the 18+ blows to his skull, resulting in a crushed brainstem from which he never recovered. His two assailants each received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole in state court. After the trials concluded, some members of both the Laramie City Police Department and the Albany County Sheriff's Department were furloughed to help defray the cost of the investigation and prosecution of the 2 assailants. Due to the fact that Wyoming had no hate crime law, federal money was not available to help cover those expenses. Even now, more than 20 years after Matt's death, Wyoming still is without a hate crime law to protect its citizens. To this day, we are unable to understand why he was murdered for being gay. Being gay is not a choice. Matt stood 5 feet 2 inches in height and weighed a mere 105 pounds at his death. Matt spoke 5 languages and was learning a 6th when he died. He was a people person, always wanting to help others. His dream was to work for the U.S. State Department to help citizens of other countries enjoy the same rights, responsibilities, privileges, and freedoms he thought, I repeat, he thought he had in this country, the country he loved so much, the country he was so proud of. Matt's death was an eye-opener for us, his parents. We had raised him and his brother to believe that they could do anything they wanted in life, as long as they were willing to work hard and make the right choices. We found out that that was true for only one of our sons, but not both. It was then that we began to learn about the blatant discriminatory practices against some of the LGBT community and the violence that accompanied some of those practices. Even though both of our sons were born in Casper, Wyoming, in the middle of the United States, and even though they were both American citizens, they were not considered equal. Our gay son would not have been allowed the same rights as our straight son. Our gay son would not have been allowed to marry the person he loved if that person was another man. Our gay son would not have been allowed to serve in the military, not have been allowed to protect and defend the country he loved. Our gay son would not have been allowed to adopt, to bring someone into his home to be loved, cherished, supported, and encouraged as he was when he was growing up. Our gay son could have been fired from his job simply because he was gay. All these so-called rights of American citizens, along with many others, that his straight brother enjoyed, but he would never have been allowed to enjoy. Such blatant discrimination encourages bullying, vandalism, and other acts of violence, encouraging closed-minded people to push harder against those they consider different because they don't fit their preconceived notions of same and thus are intimidated by these others. We realized that we could do nothing for Matt. It was too late for that. However, we could do something for Matt's friends in the LGBTQ community, so we established the Matthew Shepard Foundation. Our mission is to empower individuals to embrace human dignity and diversity through outreach, advocacy, and resource programs. We strive to replace hate with understanding, compassion, and acceptance. We educate the public, most notably members of the straight cisgender community, on the lack of civil rights protections for those who identify as LGBTQ. It was understood that nothing would be accomplished at the federal level as long as George W. Bush was president. He opposed marriage equality, opposed the rights of gays and lesbians to adopt children, and believed that private organizations had the right to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. It was understood that work needed to be done at the grassroots level to educate America on the inequities faced by LGBTQ American citizens. We worked closely with other people and groups to accomplish that goal, knowing that sometime in the future, a person would be elected president who recognized and understood the destructive nature of discrimination and would support actions that protected all U.S. citizens, not just some. In 2008, it happened. Barack Obama was elected president. He understood the historical effects of discrimination and the need for equal opportunities for all Americans. After much lobbying and finally verbal public acknowledgement, a law was passed and signed on October 29, 2009. It was the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act, the first federal law to criminalize violence against members of the LGBTQ community. It expanded protections found in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, including some key protections for gender, gender identity, disability, and sexual orientation. It gave federal prosecutors and state district attorneys additional options to pursue to prosecute hate crimes. It also provided additional funding, if needed, for local and state law enforcement in the investigation and prosecution of alleged hate crimes. Less than 2 weeks from now, we will celebrate the 10-year anniversary of that law. In the past decade, this law was used dozens of times to investigate, prosecute, and convict individuals for inflicting violence against those deemed to be others. It has brought an additional weapon into the struggle against hate, helping to protect all citizens, especially those in marginalized communities, who have the most to fear and the most to lose, including immigrants, racial and religious minorities, and the LGBTQ community. The attorneys in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, many of whom we consider friends, are the enforcers of this law. You are the guardians against hate, discrimination, and bias-motivated violence. Since the passage of Shepard-Byrd, you've been led by 4 confirmed attorneys general. Eric Holder, testifying before Congress in support of Shepard-Byrd, stated, quote, "One has to look at the unfortunate history of targets of violence. We have to face and confront that reality," end quote. When referring to the 7th anniversary of Shepard-Byrd, Attorney General Loretta Lynch stated, quote, "We are concerned with crimes against our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. We have been active, bringing hate crimes cases in a number of states around the country. I will meet with LGBTQ youth to reaffirm the department's steadfast commitment to the rights and well-being of all LGBTQ Americans," end quote. By contrast, then Senator Jeff Sessions argued against passage of this law, stating, quote, "Some are protected groups and will get special protection under this law." Attorney General William Barr stated in July that he was, quote, "deeply concerned about the rise in hate crimes and political violence that we have seen over the past decade." He then declared that, quote, "We must have zero tolerance for violence that is motivated by hatred for our fellow citizens, whether based on race, sex, or creed," end quote. While we agree with him on these points, we disagree with his statement later in that speech when he said, quote, "Hate crime and civil rights prosecutions are important tools, but they cannot solve the problem on their own. Hearts and minds must be changed, but that is not always a task to which the government is particularly well suited," end quote. Mr. Barr represents the government, and he is well suited and has the power to change hearts and minds, to promote diversity, inclusion, and equity among all groups of people, and drive out the forces of hate. As the head of the Department of Justice, he can take a stand as a member of this administration to disavow and condemn any person who fuels the fires of hate with their words or their actions. He must lead and demonstrate his refusal to accept hate in all of its manifestations. He must demonstrate courage, even if it means disagreeing with the administration. So far, he has done none of these deeds. We find it interesting and hypocritical that he would invite us to this event commemorating a hate crime law named after our son and Mr. Byrd, while at the same time asking the Supreme Court to allow the legalized firing of transgender employees. Mr. Barr, you cannot have it both ways. If you believe that employers should have the right to terminate transgender employees just because they are transgender, then you believe they are lesser than and not worthy of protection. If so, you need not invite us to future events at the Department of Justice that are billed as celebrating the law that protects these same individuals from hate crimes. Either you believe in equality for all, or you don't. We do not honor our son by kowtowing to hypocrisy. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act is the law of the land and is needed now more than ever. Unfortunately, we have seen government funding and resources shift to fighting international terrorism in the decades since the passage of Shepard-Byrd, despite the fact that hate crimes have led to far more deaths of Americans here at home, acts that would be considered domestic terrorism in so many other countries. For those of you who are career employees of the Department of Justice and truly believe in protecting all Americans from injustice, who believe in equal rights and representation for all Americans, who fight daily to protect the freedoms of all Americans, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We never doubted your commitment or resolve to honor our son's memory and legacy by enforcing this law. We appreciate all of the Assistant United States Attorneys and FBI agents who have joined our hate crime training initiatives. We understand how frustrating and thankless it is when you are fighting an uphill battle under today's political climate and with little or no support or assistance from the administration. Don't give up. Continue fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. You are their most trusted friend, advisor, confidant, and protector. We don't want to see another incident or life lost as we lost Matt. Any loss of life, any loss of a job, any loss of desire to work towards fulfilling a person's dreams and goals because of hate-related words or actions is a loss to the local community where that person lives, a loss to the state where that person resides, and a loss to this country. We look forward to a refocus of the causes of hate crimes and the reduction of hate crime incidents as America changes direction and moves forward towards a more equal and just country. Respectfully, Dennis and Judy Shepard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dito. While the Byrd family is unable to join us today, Luvon Harris, Ms. James Byrd's sister, sent a thoughtful letter on behalf of the Byrd family and foundation, which I will read. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act means a great deal to our family. It is very important to keep awareness of hate-related crimes of any kind on the forefront of our lives and on our society. We would like to thank everyone who had a part in the passage of this act. It was through your hard work, determination, and endurance that this momentous task was finally accomplished. Therefore, on this day of celebration and on behalf of the Byrd family, it is our sincere hope that this act will continue to be used as a tool to combat hate of any kind. It will forever remain a tribute to James's life and his legacy. Once again, thank you for your continued support as we work together to reduce the number of hate-related crimes through education and enforcement of this act. Luvon Byrd Harris, and the letter is also available on the back of your programs.
Thank you, Cynthia and Michelle, and thank you to both the Shepard and the Byrd families. I would now like to introduce our first presentation, A Modern-Day Lynching, United States versus Dedmon et al., which is a presentation on the first hate crime murder prosecution brought under the Shepard-Byrd Act. Leading off today's presentation will be Paige Fitzgerald and Sheldon Beer. Paige is the principal deputy chief of our criminal section, and Sheldon is a deputy chief in the criminal section here in the Civil Rights Division. Paige has been in the criminal section since 1999, and during her tenure, she has both personally prosecuted and supervised many of the section's most high-profile cases. Her awards include the Attorney General's Award for Exceptional Service, the highest level award offered by the department, which she has received twice. In addition to the Attorney General's John Marshall Award, the Civil Rights Division's John Doerr Award, and the division's Walter Barnett Award. Sheldon Beer served as a captain in the Judge Advocate General's Corps for the Army before coming to the criminal section in 2010. He has also both personally prosecuted and supervised numerous high-profile civil rights cases. Along with Paige, he received the Assistant Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award for his work on the case we're going to discuss today, the Dedmon case. We are also honored to have with us today the U.S. District Court judge who presided over the case, Judge Carlton Reeves, who will provide extended remarks. Judge Reeves will be introduced more formally by Paige Fitzgerald after her presentation.
Good afternoon. James Craig Anderson was 47 years old when he died. He left behind a mother whom he called every morning, a sister, 2 brothers, a partner of 17 years, and a 5-year-old son who was the light of his life. He worked at the Nissan plant, and he was the lead tenor in his church choir. He was an avid gardener and cook. He had no known enemies. No one had ever done him any harm. He had done no harm to anyone. And yet, on June 26, 2011, James Craig Anderson was beaten, run over, and killed by a group of young white men and women in Jackson, Mississippi. 3 members of that group were in a large Ford F-250 truck driven by Darrell Dedmon. And Darrell Dedmon, with the other occupants in his truck, saw Mr. Anderson in the parking lot and deliberately accelerated his truck directly over Mr. Anderson, causing his death. This happened in a hotel parking lot, and it was caught on videotape. We're going to show you a snippet of the videotape. And before I play it, I want to let you know that it's quite grainy, and what you're about to see will not be gory, but it will be shocking. We made the choice to show this because we thought it was important to see. It demonstrated just how quickly, almost reflexively, this incident happened, that it was callous, deliberate, and done without a second thought. As you look at the video, you're going to see on the far right side a yellow sort of highlighted portion, and that's going to be highlighting Mr. Dedmon's truck. You're going to see that truck back up as he prepares to leave the parking lot. And then, along the line there on the very far right, you're going to see a very small, almost undefined figure moving from right to left. That's Mr. Anderson, and it'll also have a highlighted circle around him. And then you're going to see Darrell Dedmon's truck accelerate directly and deliberately over Mr. Anderson, and you'll see a small white flash as that impact occurs.
How and why did this happen? We had a pretty good idea pretty quickly. Horrified employees of the Metro Inn Motel in Jackson, Mississippi witnessed what happened to Mr. Anderson. Those employees would tell law enforcement that just before Mr. Anderson was run over, one of the occupants of Darrell Dedmon's truck, a female passenger, yelled out the window explicitly, quote, "F that N," before Mr. Dedmon accelerated his vehicle into Mr. Anderson. And that right after Mr. Anderson was run over, Darrell Dedmon yelled out of his truck, "White power." As employees of the Metro Inn Motel tended to Mr. Anderson on the ground, and as other concerned citizens came over to see what happened, Darrell Dedmon and the occupants of his truck drove back past the murder scene, pointing out their window and laughing. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to James Craig Anderson in June of 2011 was a modern-day lynching, and for the first time, we had a modern-day statutory tool to address it.
So Sheldon and I went down to Mississippi that summer, and we worked alongside the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office to determine whether or not we could gather enough evidence to show that this murder was a violation of our then new statute, our new tool, our new weapon, the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Act. And as the federal investigation unfolded, we very soon learned a very disturbing truth. James Craig Anderson's death wasn't an isolated incident. This group of young white men and women had been going into Jackson repeatedly. They'd been harming other individuals. They'd been doing it for months. And they had boasted and bragged about it to dozens and dozens of their friends and acquaintances, and no one reported it. Not to a parent, not to a teacher, not to a pastor, and certainly not to a law enforcement officer. No one told. All of this happened in a modern state capital in 2011.
Now, immediately after the murder of James Craig Anderson, the FBI joined with the Civil Rights Division and the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Mississippi to develop a comprehensive investigative plan. We conducted literally hundreds of interviews. We interviewed friends, family members, acquaintances of the targets, school officials, and eyewitnesses to the murder. We issued warrants to Facebook for Facebook accounts. We got cell phone records and text messages. We combed prior police reports for evidence of prior assaults and prior instances where people were targeted and hurt. We spent dozens of hours in voluntary interviews of the targets and eyewitnesses. And we leveraged factual information we learned during those interviews to further the investigation. In the end, all 10 of the defendants confessed.
So over the course of the investigation, we learned that over a period of months, this group of 10 white young women and men had been driving repeatedly from a predominantly white suburb, Brandon, Mississippi, into Jackson, Mississippi, which they called Jaffrika. They drove there with the sole purpose of hunting for people, of hunting for African American individuals that they could physically assault. They did this under cover of night, and they did it over and over again. They did it for fun. They thought it was sport. They used the physical attacks on these people as a twisted form of entertainment. Now, not all 10 members went on every trip, but some subsets of this group went on so many occasions that they couldn't even remember the specifics of the individual incidents, except for some which stood out for them in particular.
For instance, although on almost all of the occasions they hurled large glass beer bottles at African American men they encountered on the street, beer bottles they called fence posts. They specifically remembered that on at least 2 occasions, a victim appeared to have been knocked out cold. One night, they purchased a slingshot used for hunting and then drove around Jackson to shoot metal ball bearings at African American men they encountered on the street, literally hunting human beings.
On another night, they ran across an African American man on a golf course, an abandoned golf course, that they believed to be intoxicated. A group of them left their truck, chased him down, knocked him to the ground, and while wearing steel-toed boots, beat him and kicked him over and over in the face, head, and body until he begged for his life. On yet another night, and a precursor to what happened to Mr. Anderson, there was a group in a truck that spotted an African American individual in a parking lot, and they gassed the truck towards him, forcing him to leap out of the way to avoid being struck.
James Craig Anderson was their final victim. Members of the group had been at a bonfire earlier that evening when they decided it would be a good night to return to Jaffrika. They met at a Waffle House, and then 7 of them got into 2 separate vehicles, a white Jeep and Darrell Dedmon's Ford F-250 truck, and headed to Jackson. When they got there, they eventually came upon Mr. Anderson, who was in the motel parking lot locked out of his car. Members of the group taunted him, physically kept him at the Metro Inn parking lot. At one point, one of the defendants in the case, John Aaron Rice, from behind Mr. Anderson, sucker punched him in the face, causing him to fall to the ground. Darrell Dedmon then got on top of him, and he began to punch him and punch him and punch him. He beat Mr. Anderson while yelling racially derogatory slurs, degrading and humiliating. When it was over, when that physical assault was over, members of this group got back into their vehicles. The white Jeep left, and then Darrell Dedmon left the scene. But before he did so, he backed his Ford F-250 truck up, he pointed the headlights directly at Mr. Anderson, and he hit the gas. That truck ran over Mr. Anderson. It was one of the last images Mr. Anderson ever saw. He died as a result of those injuries.
So the prosecution team ended up identifying all 10 of the young white men and women who were engaged in this broader-based hate crime conspiracy. But I note that Shelley said earlier this was a modern-day lynching. But what's interesting is that in the past, lynchings tended to be public executions that were done at least under the pretense of exacting some form of justice for some criminal allegation, no matter how specious. But these defendants, they weren't even acting under the pretext of exacting any form of justice. They were doing it for fun. They didn't know anything about Mr. Anderson. They didn't know anything about any of their victims. They didn't know about their lives. They didn't know about their loved ones. All they knew was that they were black. And based on that, based on the color of their skin, these defendants deemed those victims unworthy of their very humanity.
But in this case, we exacted the right kind of justice. We were able to use the Shepard-Byrd Act in the first prosecution under the Act where someone was murdered. And in this case, we convicted all 10 defendants.
Darrell Dedmon, the driver of the F-250 who ran over Mr. Anderson and who had participated in numerous other acts of violence. John Aaron Rice, the young man who sucker punched Mr. Anderson in that parking lot and had also participated in multiple other incidents.
Dylan Wade Butler, a participant and an occupant in the white Jeep on the night that Mr. Anderson was murdered. He astonishingly came from a mixed-race family. Kirk Montgomery, the driver of the white Jeep on the night that Mr. Anderson was murdered, and a participant on other assaultive excursions to Jackson.
John Lewis Blaylock, who was one of the individuals who helped beat Mr. Anderson that night and had been involved in multiple other incidents, including the golf course night with the steel-toed boots. Shelby Richards, Daryl Dedmon's girlfriend, who was a passenger in that Ford F-250, and who encouraged Daryl Dedmon to run over Mr. Anderson and had encouraged violence on prior occasions.
Sarah Graves, the other female passenger in Daryl Dedmon's vehicle, who also encouraged Mr. Dedmon to run over Mr. Anderson, and who also had been someone who encouraged violence on prior occasions. Jonathan Gaskamp, who participated in other beatings and was the primary participant in the golf course beating night.
Robert Rice, John Aaron Rice's brother, who also participated in numerous other attacks and was the driver of the truck, the other night that they attempted to run somebody over. And finally, Joseph Dominic. He was involved in the slingshot night and was the one who purchased that device.
Now, we would not have been able to charge these defendants with federal hate crimes before the enactment of the Shepard-Byrd Act. In addition to substantial imprisonment sentences, we were able to secure a restitution amount of $840,000 for the family of James Craig Anderson. Now, no amount of money will ever bring back or account for the true value of James Craig Anderson's life, but we hope that this restitution order will ease the burden on their family. And this restitution order will ensure that these defendants will pay for their crimes for many years to come.
So we've given you an overview of the facts of this case, and now I want to turn this over to a very special guest. The defendants' criminal cases in this situation were brought in federal court. They were brought in the Southern District of Mississippi. The first three defendants who pled guilty were Daryl Dedmon, John Aaron Rice, and Dylan Butler. Their hearings were presided over by the judge, Honorable Judge Carlton Reeves in Mississippi. Judge Reeves was born about 9 months after Mr. Anderson, and he was raised in Yazoo City, Mississippi. He went on to Jackson State University, where he graduated magna cum laude. And then he went to the University of Virginia, where he received the Ritter Prize for exemplifying honor, character, and integrity. He served as a staff attorney for the Mississippi Supreme Court, and then went into private practice, and then was the chief of the Civil Division of the United States Attorney's Office, before becoming the second African-American federal judge from the state of Mississippi. He's ruled on a number of important cases involving civil rights and equality, and he is the 2019 recipient of the University of Virginia's Thomas Jefferson Foundation Medal. Judge Reeves's impassioned remarks at the sentencing of this case moved everyone who heard them. He noted the historical significance of this case to the state of Mississippi. I am deeply honored and absolutely delighted to have Judge Reeves with us here today to talk about the impact of this case on him and on the state of Mississippi. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Judge Reeves.
General Dreiband, Mr. Boosie, everyone here, I must say that I'm deeply honored and humbled to be here today. It is also a day of reflection, commemoration, and a day when we pause to think about what it is that this Department of Justice does. Who are these folk who make up our Department of Justice? And just on behalf of whom do these folk get up every day to change the lives of all Americans? I cannot be here today without thinking about a former Solicitor General who, as a private lawyer, I say private, but we all know he was a public lawyer. He was the people's lawyer. He walked through these halls. No one argued more cases and had more victories here at the U.S. Supreme Court. Victories that had such an enormous effect on the lives of every American today. As a lawyer, that Solicitor General, and as a justice on the Supreme Court, he understood that African Americans had been enslaved by law, emancipated by law, disenfranchised and segregated by law. And it was finally through his efforts and so many others, we began to win equality by law. Along the way, he said, new constitutional principles have emerged to meet the challenges of a changing society. Others would replicate what Thurgood Marshall's strategies to expand the reach of the 14th Amendment. It was the 14th Amendment that reconstructed and breathed new life into the phrase, "we the people." Because of his advocacy, we the people truly means all the people. I bring you greetings from Mississippi, a state you just may have heard about, a state that John Doe spent too much of his time in, and we are grateful for that. A state that benefited so much from you, the foot soldiers, who were trained in these halls. The foot soldiers who got up every morning. The foot soldiers who spent days, weeks, and months away from their families in the name of justice. Whether in the voting section seeking to enforce the Voting Rights Act, what Gordon Martin Jr., who also walked these halls, called the greatest civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. John Doe and a group of ragtag people from here, the foot soldiers, committed lawyers in this civil rights division. When it was in its infancy, they came down to Mississippi, and they would bring the case of United States versus Theron Lind, a case that helped to bring about the passage of the voting rights. It was the first case brought to trial in Mississippi by the Justice Department. Thank God it was not the last case. Taking on, as Judge Martin said, a seemingly omnipotent registrar's denial of the right to vote to African Americans. I bring you greetings from Mississippi, a place where the education section came down to add life and meaning to the Supreme Court's most noted decision, Brown versus Board of Education. I bring you greetings from my Mississippi, the state where citizen soldiers of this Justice Department have spent countless hours seeking to enforce the Fair Housing Act. So you say, why are you talking about your Mississippi and what happened way back then? Because my Mississippi, the one of the state that has represented one of the most prominent scars on this country, has benefited so much because of you. Its native sons have benefited, its native daughters. The mere mention of just some names evokes emotion, anguish, and pain. Emmett, Medgar, Fannie Lou, Cheney, Goodman, Schwerner, Damon, Meredith, Murley, and yes, the names that bring you angst and consternation: Barnett, Bilbo, Eastland, Beckwith, Avance, Bowers, Cox. Other states, too, have given us names we shall never forget, because Emmett now sits with the angels next to him. Addie Mae, Carol, Cynthia, Denise. There are others: Viola Louisa, Arthurine Lucy. There are others: Ruby Bridges, Minnie Jean, Melba. There are others. But part of the commemoration today adds a new name: James Craig Anderson. I bring you greetings from Mississippi, the place where Paige Fitzgerald and Sheldon Beer, foot soldiers, would come to do justice. James Craig Anderson's life was cut short in a very painful way. His blood has been added to the soil drenched by the blood of so many others. His name has been etched into the history books alongside the names of those children who had to have seen the agony in his eyes, the look of bewilderment on his face, a face contorted by fear, confusion, horror, and pain. So when you ask me to participate in this commemoration, I hope that I could answer that question that I raised during those sentencings. How could hate, fear, or whatever it was that transformed genteel, God-fearing, God-loving Mississippians into mindless murderers and sadistic torturers? What could have caused them to act in such a deadly way? That was the question that went throughout my mind the entire case of this trial. What could have caused them to alter their lives in the way that they did? As I sat there that day thinking about as I sat there those days thinking about that upcoming sentencing, what is it that I could say to them, their parents, James Anderson's relatives? What could I say? I thought about Ed Brown, Henry Shields, and Yank Ellington. You lawyers know the case of Brown versus Mississippi. It was a case that said the due process clause is applicable to the states and you can't beat a confession out of an individual. Well, these guys were arrested for murder in 1934 on March 30th. The subsequent conviction rested, as the Supreme Court said, solely upon confessions shown to have been extorted by officers of the state by brutality and violence. The beatings began on March 30th. The next guy was arrested on the 31st. The beatings commenced. April 1st, 1934, more beatings. April 2nd, 1934. Testimony: I think I heard some confessions. April 3rd, 1934, the grand jury was convened. April 4th, 1934, the grand jury returned an indictment. April 4th, 1934, the defendants were arraigned. April 4th, 1934, the defendants were appointed counsel. April 5th, 1934, their trial began. April 6, 1934, their trial ended. April 6, 1934, they were sentenced to death. The transcript, the Supreme Court explained, read more like pages torn from some medieval account than a record made within the confines of modern civilization. So as I thought about what it is that I could say, what it was that I could do, I thought about Myrlie Evers and the very first sentence in her book, For Us the Living. Somewhere in Mississippi lives the man who murdered my husband, murdered in his carport after attending a rally at church, murdered before he could kiss his children on the cheek or the forehead and kiss his wife one last time. I thought about how Medgar Evers was still stirring in his grave 30 years before justice knocked at the door of his murderer. I thought about in years past how Mississippi was engaged in a mission to deny my relatives and others like me their inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. I thought about those things. I thought about those children who came to Mississippi as freedom riders, ready to make change in Mississippi. They could vote in the states where they left, but they came to Mississippi to teach us how to vote, to show us how democracy ought to work. And I thought about these kids, children in Yazoo City, who in 1970, for the first time, black kids and white kids were allowed to go to school together. This is the last day of the first grade of Annie Ellis Elementary, Grand Avenue, Yazoo City, Miss Thornton's class. It was 50 years ago that the case of Alexander versus Holmes County came down. And there the Supreme Court said, all deliberate speed means now. So when kids went home for Christmas break in 1969, they came back to an integrated setting. And it was in 1970, in September, that these kids started the first grade together. This is the last day of class. You see smiles on their faces. You see that kids can love each other. You see that kids are all kids having fun. So when I thought about this case, wondering what went wrong with these children, what happened, what had they learned? Because as 6-year-olds, they didn't learn anything but love. They didn't learn anything but fun. They didn't learn anything but childish things. They learned how to play together. That group of kids would go on and have Yazoo City's first integrated prom. That group of kids would select as its class song as they march across the field, Ebony and Ivory. That group of kids. So when I saw this group of kids, I had the unenviable task of looking throughout the courtroom, and I could not understand how could hate, fear, or whatever it was that transformed these genteel, God-fearing, God-loving Mississippis into these mindless murderers and sadistic torturers. How could those children embody all the qualities of the Mississippi that I had longed to close the chapter on? That Mississippi that has a tortured past. That Mississippi, like this country, which has struggled mightily to reinvent itself. These were the things that was on my mind that day. I'm not going to read the sentencing speech. You all probably already have. But there is a portion in there that I do want to read. And actually, it's two sentencing speeches. The second one didn't get any attention. But on the day that these kids were sentenced, we talked about history. As Sheldon mentioned at lunch today, he recalls me saying, "You need to sit down. I want to talk to you. Might take a while." The portion that I want to read to you is this. Today, we take another step away from Mississippi's tortured past. And it's because of the foot soldiers of this department. We move farther away from the abyss. Indeed, Mississippi is a place and a state of mind. And those who think they know about her people and her past will also understand that her story has not been completely written. Mississippi has a present, and we know Mississippi has a future. That present and future have promise, as demonstrated by the work of the officers within these state and federal agencies, black and white, male and female. In this Mississippi, they work together to advance the rule of law. Having learned from Mississippi's inglorious past, these officials know that in advancing the rule of law, the criminal justice must operate without regard to race, creed, or color. This is the strongest way Mississippi can reject those notions, those ideas which brought us here today. That's the Mississippi I want to portray. That's the Mississippi we want other states to emulate, because Mississippi is not alone in all the pain and all the grief that it has caused. And I'll open with a Solicitor General in this esteemed Department of Justice, this Solicitor General, who also said, "I wish I could say that racism and prejudice were only distant memories. We must dissent from indifference. We must dissent from apathy. We must dissent from fear, the hatred, and the mistrust. We must dissent because America has no choice but to do better." And finally, I'm going to close with the Attorney General, an Attorney General who served these United States. And he was the Attorney General on April 4th, 1968, when Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. He got word on his plane or train or whatever mode of transportation he was on that day. He got word that he had been assassinated. And Kennedy stopped in Indianapolis, Indiana. And after hearing what had happened, he chunked his speech and he spoke to the crowd, because they had not heard. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have Twitter. He said, in this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it is perhaps well to ask what kind of nation we are and what direction we want to move in. And in light of all the talk that we've seen about doing things to people for all the wrong reasons, hurting people for all the wrong reasons, because of their race, because of their creed, because of their color, because of their religion, it is still appropriate today to ask, what kind of nation are we, and what direction should we move? Robert Kennedy answered that rhetorical question. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or they be black. And I add whether they are Hispanic, Native American, Asian, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, agnostic, atheist, gay, straight, transgender, rich, poor, legal, illegal. All of us. We must not allow those who sow fear, those who do acts like was done in that day, we must not allow those acts to prevail to deny all of us the promise of America. God bless the souls of Matthew Shepard and James Craig Anderson. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paige, Sheldon, and Judge Reeves. We will now hear remarks from Terry Wade, the Assistant Director of the Criminal Investigative Division at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. In September 2019, Director Christopher Wray named Special Agent Terry Wade as the Assistant Director of the Criminal Investigative Division at FBI headquarters. The Criminal Investigative Division manages and directs investigative programs focused on financial, violent, and organized crimes, public corruptions, civil rights violations, and drug-related crimes. Mr. Wade joined the FBI as a special agent in 1996 and has served in a variety of leadership positions in FBI offices across the country, to include Albuquerque, Oklahoma City, and of course, Washington, D.C. Assistant Director Wade.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm extremely honored to be here to represent the FBI on this important day when we recognize 10 years of this historic legislation. While I think we'd all agree that it's disappointing that we have to have laws like the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, it's sad that it even has to exist. But I'm comforted by the fact that it's helped the FBI, our law enforcement partners, and the Department of Justice hold those accountable who commit hate-inspired acts of violence, and to help keep our communities safer. Unfortunately, even in 2019, we still confront people who use hatred to take violent action against others because of where they come from, how they worship, what they look like, or who they love. That's why we're here today, to acknowledge the important work of those who oppose hate and help create the Shepard-Byrd Act. And it's equally important to find opportunities like today to meet one another, to talk about what we're seeing, and to find new ways to work together and improve. In the FBI, our mission is a simple one. It's to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. One of the core things that we do as part of that mission is to protect civil rights and preserve the civil liberties of those that we protect. It's at the heart of everything we do. It's long been one of the FBI's investigative priorities, and that will never change. Hate crime strikes at the heart of who we are as a society. It strikes at the heart of every community in this great nation. And it certainly strikes at the heart of every individual who is targeted because of who they are and what they believe. It's the FBI's responsibility to do everything we can, from our investigative capabilities to strong partnerships to community outreach, in an effort to stop these acts of violence. We are a society that cherishes our freedom of speech, even if it's speech that we don't agree with. Everyone has an opinion, and some of those opinions are louder and more aggressive than others. And that's okay, because it's part of the American experience. What's not okay is those instances where words quickly turn to violence, where hate speech turns to hate crime. So with that, we have to do everything in our power to to bring those to justice who commit these heinous acts of hate. We continue to investigate hate crime with every tool, every investigative technique, and every resource at our disposal. And our agents or analysts are good at what they do. Our efforts to identify and stop hate crime consist of three primary components. First, we coordinate with our state and local partners in their hate crime investigations, even when we aren't pursuing federal charges. And that's something I want to talk to you a little bit more about. We're here to talk about this legislation on this important anniversary, but it's not the only tool in our prosecution toolbox, in our investigative toolbox. Mr. Dreiband cited some important statistics about how often this statute's been utilized, and those are important. It's crucial, this particular legislation. But it's important to note some important byproducts of that legislation and the attention that's been paid to it. And that is, those statistics alone do not capture the importance of the attention that's been paid to this. There are times for different evidentiary reasons, different investigative reasons, different prosecutorial guidelines, that different statutes, even different venues, are better served than just this statute. It's not always possible to prove this statute as important as this statute is. However, one of the great byproducts of this legislation was the light that it focused on these type of investigations. It's enabled the FBI to reach out to our state and local partners and engage in training, engage in outreach on how important these type of investigations are. So for us, there may be a time that the best venue for prosecuting a crime could be in a local district attorney's office. And that's fine if we are prosecuting a case in Comanche County, Oklahoma with the district attorney's office where I'm from, or if the better venue for a particular offense is in the Southern District of New York in the United States Attorney's Office. It doesn't matter to us in law enforcement and shouldn't matter to any of us who gets the credit or how these things come about. What is important is making our communities safer and holding those accountable who commit these crimes. And I think that the overall importance of this legislation can't be overstated in that fight. And I applaud all of those who made that come to be and who continue in that fight 10 years later. The second component that I'd like to talk about is that we're working with civil rights, minority groups, and faith communities to build trusted relationships, share information, talk about our respective concerns, and find a way forward. Third, we're hosting training sessions, as I alluded to earlier, for local law enforcement, minority and religious organizations, and community groups, so that everyone has a better understanding of what hate crime is and how the FBI can help. In summing up, I'd like to have a few quick notes. We know that as a law enforcement agency, we can't eradicate hate. We can't eradicate prejudice or change the minds of small-minded people. But we can stand together to keep people safe and strong and hold people accountable for their illegal actions. For our part, in the FBI, we're going to keep doing the right thing in the right way. We're going to keep building relationships with all of you, sharing best practices, and building on our collective successes. We're proud to stand with all of you, fighting to protect those who can't protect themselves, who want to live free from oppression for simply being themselves. We have a lot of work to do, a lot of things before us. We continue to stand on the side of fairness and equality and the freedoms upon which this country was founded. And we'll all be safer if we continue to do so. Most importantly, we need to continue to stand together in this fight. Thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Assistant Director Wade. We will now hear from our second presentation, a panel entitled Uniting Against Hate, Cultivating Law Enforcement Community Partnerships. This panel will be moderated by Catherine Sullivan, the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Office of Justice Programs. Prior to leading the Office of Justice Programs, Ms. Sullivan served as the acting director of the Office of Violence Against Women, and before that served as a Colorado State Trial Court judge and a deputy district attorney in Colorado. Mrs. Sullivan.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I first want to give a special thank you to Assistant Attorney General Dreiband. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting this. Thank you for being a great leader of our Civil Rights Department. And I want to also obviously thank Attorney General Barr, again, for hosting this and for being such a strong advocate against all forms of violent crime, but particularly those that affect our most vulnerable populations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our panel. I had an opportunity prior to today not only to read what each of these esteemed individuals have done, but also to have some time with them to talk to them about what brings them here today and what their passion is. And I think that really the thread that works through this panel is this idea of increased collaboration. And I have to say that we're going to start with Phil Keith. Phil is the head of the COPS office, and that stands for the Community-Oriented Policing Services Office. He has a ridiculous amount of experience in the field, both working for the major city chiefs, but also heading up a law enforcement agency in Tennessee. I don't want to say how many years, Phil, because that wouldn't be fair, but I know that your collaborative reform project and your training and technical assistance that you're partnering with IACP on is something that you feel very passionate about. So could you kind of get the ball rolling and tell us about that initiative?
Sure. Thank you, Katie. That was a nice way of saying I'm old. When you're born in the first half of the previous century, you are old. But with that comes hopefully some experience and wisdom. And as Katie mentioned, through the guidance we received from General Barr and his directives, as well as the President's executive order in February of 2017, the COPS office is vested to support the department's position and strategies on reducing violent crime and specifically hate crimes. So to cut to the chase, so to speak, our role in the initiative is to develop training and technical assistance for state, local, and tribal law enforcement. What that involves is we have a collaborative reform initiative that we fund to the IACP along with principal stakeholders who represent the law enforcement field, the FOP, the NAPO, IACP, National Sheriff's Association, major county sheriffs, and major city chiefs, and there are others. With those stakeholders, our mission through our collaborative reform is to provide assistance to chiefs and sheriffs across the country that best suits their needs, not what we think here in Washington, but what they need in order to attack violent crime and other issues. So that collaborative reform funding allows police chiefs and sheriffs to seek training and/or technical assistance to meet their individual needs in their individual communities. Within that delivery vehicle, we have looked very carefully at hate crimes. And so our role is to develop training that can be suited for law enforcement, much like Assistant Director Wade mentioned from the FBI is governed by certain engagements. So most of you know law enforcement is our society's referees. They're not the first stop on the conveyor belt, they're the last stop. When everything else fails, law enforcement's called to the scene. Our role is to identify that mission. What can we give law enforcement in the way of tools? When an act is passed, it doesn't always carry skills and necessary competencies law enforcement needs to do their job. So when at the COPS office, we've examined the issues. We know that there are some states that have hate crime statutes and other states that don't have hate crime statutes. There's a federal statute, and so each of those require different skill set. For those of us who worked in law enforcement, we know, for example, if we're going to take a gun case to a state court, there's certain statutory requirements, elements of an offense, if you will, that we have to take that case to the state court. But taking that same gun case to a federal court requires a lot more. And so we have to be able to train the law enforcement field up if they expect to take a gun case federally on what those elements require. Same with hate crimes, except this at disadvantage. A lot of states don't have hate crime statutes. So our default position is the federal statute. And so we have to train up, if you will, the law enforcement staff that serve our communities across America on what the requisite requirements are to identify hate crimes, investigate them, report them, and carry out their mission. So at the COPS office, what we're trying to do through collaborative reform is identify about 3 fundamental buckets of training, if you will. One is focused on awareness and basic identification of hate crimes, both for law enforcement and for communities, because as the assistant director said, there's a lot of hateful speech, but it doesn't rise to the level of a statutory violation. So we'll have one focus on orientation, and there's another focus on general education, raising the competency of law enforcement from the line officer through the chief or sheriff on what they need to know about hate crimes and specific to their state and their jurisdictions. And then the third area would be on increasing the investigative skills. A lot of times you'll hear discussions around, well, we need to have the detective or the investigator to do the investigation. Well, in American policing, 80 to 85% of the law enforcement agencies have fewer than 50 officers. So the first responding officer is also the investigator, is also the evidence collector, is also the person who prepares that case for the DA or to take it federally. So our focus again is to give law enforcement the skill set it needs in order to investigate such crimes. And so, Katie, it's a lot, but we think that it's very similar to what we were tackling with domestic violence. When I was a young rookie in 1970, domestic violence wasn't treated very well in this country. But 50 years later, we still haven't finished the finish line. As A.G. Barr often says, law enforcement's involved in a battle where there's never going to be an end game. There's never going to be an end victory. So we're in it for the long run. So how we dealt with domestic violence over the last 50 years is somewhat like what we're going to be dealing with hate crimes today. It's going to take a migration, as Assistant Director Wade said, we can't change the minds of people who are warped and have hate. But what we can do is train our professional law enforcement with the skill sets they need to investigate and collect evidence and find the correct venue to prosecute the case.
So I just want to follow up on 2 things. One, quickly, the roundtable. So a year ago, right, there was a roundtable with law enforcement, community organizations, policymakers, our partners like our IACP and other law enforcement association partners. Is that correct?
Yes.
And out of that, there was a real request from local law enforcement that they get training in how to investigate a hate crime in order to have a successful prosecution. Is that, I'm just
Yes,
checking.
I think it's one thing to talk about it at 30,000 feet, but if you're the officer responding to that incident, you need to know the specifics. This is not for a faint at heart. You have to know the facts. You have to know how to create or how to preserve evidence, how to collect evidence, how to treat the victim. There's a lot that goes into it. So that was one of the specific recommendations that came out of the group, is to provide that training.
So, and then, like, to take that a step further, the idea that there's states, which we've heard today, that do not have hate crime laws on the books. Those cases then have to be elevated up to our U.S. attorney partners, correct? But your first point of contact is going to be a local law enforcement officer. They need to investigate in a way that a U.S. attorney can go ahead, our foot soldiers, as the judge so beautifully put it, and then are able to take and successfully prosecute that crime in federal court, right? So
yes.
That's that's part of the working together, which leads beautifully into Jerry Ratliff. So Ms. Ratliff is the Deputy Director of the Community Relations Service. That is an office here at the Department of Justice. CRS plays an important role in DOJ's ongoing efforts to strengthen relationships between local communities and law enforcement communities. And so there's a lot of very cool things that CRS does. Jerry's obviously much more adept at talking about them. But I was hoping that you could talk about the U.S. Attorney trainings that are going to be rolled out, because it fits in so perfectly with what Phil was saying is going on at the local level.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Katie. So absolutely, CRS, as many of you know, supports what communities are doing locally to prevent and respond to hate crimes. And I do want to put in a plug to the outreach program that Assistant Attorney General Dreiband mentioned in his opening remarks. That is an outreach program that CRS has been a part of developing as a component of the Hate Crimes Enforcement and Prevention Initiative. And it fits in very well with our work helping communities strengthen their relationship with law enforcement, developing that trust, which will lead to better reporting. The training is going to be, the outreach program is starting with the phase 1, a hate crimes training, that's going to be piloted very soon in the Northern District of Georgia. So if we have anyone here who has community groups in the Georgia area, Northern Georgia, who might be interested, let me know afterwards. This training is going to be put on by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District. And it's developed for community groups who want to learn more about, you know, what is a federal hate crime? How come not every bias incident rises to the level of a federal or even a state hate crime? How do I know the difference? How do I report it? And then it's also geared toward having space to just strengthen those relationships between the community groups and the federal and, of course, state and local law enforcement that's so important to all of our work to prevent and respond to hate crimes.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then you were also part of that roundtable a year ago, correct?
We were a part, yes.
And what was your, would you say, was your biggest takeaway from the last year's event in October?
Well, I think the way that CRS fits into the roundtable's work is through, as I mentioned, our work supporting communities and law enforcement as they work to strengthen that trust in their relationship. So we have our conciliation specialists in the field work all across the United States to work with law enforcement and communities who want to tackle that important work of building trust, strengthening those relationships. And we have both standard programs where we convene dialogue sessions that are geared toward specifically for that locality, having the community and the local law enforcement together decide how to best strengthen that relationship. What actions can they take that will help their situation? We have programs that fit right in with the roundtable's work.
That's great. Thank you. I love to hear that something happens and then there's follow-up, and there has been so much in this past year. So thank you for that, but I do want to move on to Nadia Aziz. Thank you so much for joining the Department of Justice today. Nadia, she is the co-director and policy counsel for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, and she works very specifically with the Stop Hate Project, which I think we talked a little bit, and she said that she loves being able to work on one thing and focus on one thing, but at the same time, it's such a difficult topic. And I love kind of where you came from, because this goes to the comment about changing the hearts and minds of our communities. And so you wanted to talk about the impact of hate.
Yes.
And I think this is so important to hear, so thank you.
Thank you. First, I wanted to thank the Shepard-Byrd families for their remarks today. Cynthia, I know we've worked very closely with the Shepard Foundation, and I just wanted to say the courage of these two families to turn an incredibly painful experience into action and advocacy never ceases to amaze me. So thank you very much. One of the things we do at the Lawyers Committee Stop Hate Project we also host law enforcement trainings in conjunction with the Matthew Shepard Foundation. And we bring together law enforcement and prosecutors, so investigators and prosecutors, and we always have a community component. And one of the reasons this is so critical to our work is because we feel that in order to establish this trust and build this trust that is critical to creating partnerships, we have to first acknowledge the climate of fear and hate and the impact that it has on communities. So for example, hate crimes don't just target an individual, they target entire communities. So when Khalid Jabara, an Arab American, is shot and killed on the front steps of his family home by his neighbor, it doesn't just affect Khalid Jabara and the Jabara family, it affects all Arab Americans. When worshipers are killed in Charleston or in Pittsburgh, it doesn't just affect those worshipers. It makes everyone fearful of going to church or of going to their synagogue. And it's critically important to acknowledge that. It can be very difficult for communities, understandably so, to come to the table to discuss these things. It's a very vulnerable, painful, isolating experience. But one thing that's also critical that's happening right now is that we'll talk about data in a minute, but it's so important to report hate crimes. But if a community member is fearful or is afraid to make a wellness call to their local law enforcement, for example, if they're afraid it might end in murder, they're not going to report a hate crime to their police department. So it's really important that we acknowledge these realities, and having honest, difficult conversations is one way to start to build the collaboration that we need to fight hate.
Great, thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I have about 100 follow-up questions, but because I've already gotten a time signal, I do want to make sure that we hear from everyone. Chief Johnson, Will Johnson, is from the Arlington, Texas Police Department. He also has multiple years of law enforcement experience and has been a police chief since March of 2013. He also serves as the vice president at large of IACP. And Chief, you created a report through your position at IACP, an action agenda for community organizations and law enforcement to enhance the response to hate crime. And I thought you could tell us a little bit about that report.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the Department of Justice for hosting this very important event, celebrating a really sad occurrence in terms of what happened to these families that are represented today. But I echo the sentiments about the positive strength and resiliency in which we can all focus on and move together in shared values. And so when we talk about this report, it's true that it was in partnership with IACP, but it's equally important that it was in partnership with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law. Because what we recognize in law enforcement are a couple fundamental facts. And that is, hate crimes are crimes against society, they're crimes against humanity, and they are a crime in which the victimization that occurs is far beyond the initial target of that act. And whenever those cases are brought into the courtroom, the direct victim might be represented in that courtroom, but there are many other victims within the community whose names are not going to be on any of the documents, but are equally going to be harmed by that act. And so what we wanted to do is, as a local law enforcement official, I'm in the community every single day, and I see this pain and frustration and hurt that's occurring because of these crimes. And people want to see tangible, actionable things that they can touch, see, feel, that is in direct response to us addressing this scourge in society. And by the production of this report, not only from law enforcement's perspective, but also from the civil rights and activist perspective, it can demonstrate to communities that we don't have to be in 100% agreement on every single topic to have absolute agreement on shared goals and work together. And one of the greatest challenges we have in society right now is if I disagree with you on one point and I agree with you on 50 points, I'm not going to work with you on those 50 points because I'm so focused and entrenched on my one point of disagreement. And if we truly want to have movement in society and help protect our communities, we have got to move beyond that as a society. And this report helps us do that. Let's focus on the things that we absolutely believe in together: better education, better training, better understanding in the community about what hate crimes are. When I heard the judge's comments about these kids and how did they change, the mere fact that hate incidents have the same impact as hate crimes in communities, but they don't have the same legal proceedings. And we as communities have to be able to come together to address these hate incidents with the same rigor and vigor and leaning in posture as we do on hate crimes. And absent a kind of collaborative strategy, we won't be able to do that. And that's what this report gives us, is a shared collaborative strategy to accomplish that goal.
Thank you so much, Chief. And I did have an opportunity to read that report, and what I loved, one of the things I loved about it was that it's 5 action points here, the 5 things we need to do, and to give that direction to law enforcement and our community organizations is so great. So thank you, and thank you for your passion in this issue. And Michael Lieberman from the Anti-Defamation League, Washington Council is next. Michael has been with the ADL since 1988. He is director of the ADL Civil Rights Policy Planning Center. Brilliant guy, very focused on data. And so I know that you want to talk about this ever important impact on data.
Yeah, thanks. I admit to being a little bit of a data geek on hate crime. And what we know from the FBI, I think I want to also associate myself with the incredible honor to the Shepard family and to the Byrd family, the courage to come forward, to stay with it as we worked for 13 years to get the legislation passed. But I think it would not have been passed but for the FBI's work on the Hate Crime Statistics Act. We know from the Hate Crime Statistics Act, the most recent data from 2017, that there were something like 7,175 hate crimes reported by over 15,000 law enforcement agencies across the country. But I think for the advocates, the number 7,175 is very hard to get your hands around. The thing that matters to us is 1. What happens to the 1? Is law enforcement prepared, able, ready to respond to the individual hate crime victim? And I think the outreach that Director Keith is talking about in terms of training law enforcement is incredibly important. The leadership from Chief Johnson, incredibly important. And it takes 2. You've got to have law enforcement that can identify, be trained to identify, report, and respond. And you also have to have community members that are willing to call the police to report that they've been the victim of a hate crime. If marginalized, targeted community members, immigrants, people with disabilities, LGBTQ community members, Muslims, Arabs, people with limited language proficiency cannot report or do not feel safe reporting, then law enforcement cannot effectively address these crimes. So it takes 2, and that's why the data we can build on, the nature and magnitude of the problem is really important, and it is a way forward to know how to go forward.
Yeah, I think in talking to all of you and then hearing these comments together, and unfortunately we just don't have any more time, but what I get is that these are difficult conversations, that the solution is to have the difficult meetings and the difficult conversations. Chief Johnson, you have indicated that it can be that sometimes people aren't even coming to the table to begin the conversation, but if we had one thing to really encourage, I think everybody would agree, it's that we have to start to listen to each other, whether it's through an intermediary like Nadia's program, whether it's with this collaborative program of Director Keith's, through any one of these ways. What we have to do is buckle down and start to look at things in a joint manner, start to build bridges of trust. I always like to leave on somewhat of a hopeful note. That's why we have these summits, right? Is so that we can hear not only about the problem, but look at what are the next steps. Chief Johnson, again, I think that your report is very informative and kind of gives us direct action steps, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you joining the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General Dreiband here at the Department of Justice. So thank you very much.
Just a few closing remarks and our program will conclude. Assistant Attorney General Dreiband opened his remarks today recounting our history as a nation built on a government that strives to secure liberty and equality for our people. He described how our government and we, as its agents, have over time wrestled with and responded to hate crimes that harm our fellow people and also harm our federal government's core promise of liberty and equality for all. We heard from many of our speakers that hate crimes come in many forms: murder, arson, assaults, threats. But regardless of the form of violence, they all have one thing in common. Hate crimes of any kind injure our common sense of liberty and justice, the core values we ask our government to secure, and in specific, our federal government to secure. Recognizing this fact, and through the advocacy and dedication of the Shepard-Byrd families and so many in this room and others, our Congress, 10 years ago, enacted the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Act. Today you heard about what that law has done. The federal government has prosecuted horrible acts of hate crime violence. We have, as a whole department, partnered with state and local law enforcement to help local authorities identify and prosecute hate crimes. We have helped state and local law enforcement, and you heard today from Chief Johnson that they have helped us in this important work. In the panel Ms. Sullivan moderated on law enforcement and community partnerships, you heard how we've worked with communities across our nation to heal the wounds hate violence has left behind. And as the presentation by our prosecutors and Judge Reeves explained, you heard how the Shepard-Byrd Act allowed the family of James Craig Anderson and the people of Mississippi to know that our government, our Department of Justice, would call out hate violence for what it is, would respond to it, acknowledge its gravity, and acknowledge the destruction that it wrought on that family and an entire community, and that we would prosecute that crime. While today's commemoration honors the past, today we also recognize the work to fight hate crimes that is happening right now. Right now, as you've heard, our prosecutors, FBI agents, and state and local authorities are working on matters involving hate violence that have been traumatic to our nation. Thanks to the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crime Prevention Act, the Department of Justice has strengthened its hate crimes prosecution program, and the department is affirming our government's commitment to safeguarding liberty and equality in places where hate violence has struck, like Pittsburgh, like Charlottesville, Kansas, South Carolina. We're there. And when hate violence harms a community, we need to do more than prosecute. The Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act established a critical foundation for the federal government's important role in supporting local law enforcement and local communities. You heard today about the department's work to support our local communities from representatives of our Office of Justice Programs, our Community Relations Service, our Community-Oriented Policing Service. Working on their own and through the department's ongoing and productive hate crimes enforcement and prevention initiative. You also heard that in order to heal the wounds of hate violence in our communities, we must improve on the identification and reporting of hate crimes. And we've increased training of federal, state, and local law enforcement officers to ensure that hate crimes are identified and prosecuted to the fullest extent possible. In all of this work, I want to acknowledge the important work of our partners in the non-governmental organizations, many of whom are here today, who contribute so meaningfully to this work. You advocated for this law for over a decade. And since 2009, you've stuck with us through support, through constructive criticism, to help us implement the Shepard-Byrd Act. And we thank you for that. In conclusion, on behalf of the Hate Crimes Enforcement and Prevention Initiative, we thank all who spoke from the heart today and made this commemoration so meaningful. We also thank particular individuals without whom this anniversary could not have happened, including Jerry Ratliff and her wonderful team at the Community Relations Service, especially Melody Caprio, Fong Din, and Julie Vianello, and their whole team who managed all of the logistics behind this event. We really want to thank Sheila Ferran and her excellent team from the Policy and Strategy section, especially Michelle Coles. And also for the critical work on the deliverables we mentioned today, we want to thank Phil Keith, the director of our COPS office, and his staff, especially Nasmia Kamri. And a final note of gratitude goes to all of those, including many in this room, who who continue to serve on the front lines in the battle against hate crimes. Now more than ever, this work matters. Thank you, and this concludes our commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act.